Aiken coming to you from the Aiken Research Group. It is Sunday, November 29th, Thanksgiving weekend, 2015. And today we want to talk a little bit about, keep it a little lighter, and talk about casinos and casino games, and in particular, talk about the game of blackjack and how poker players can apply their poker thinking in the game of blackjack. So what we want to get started with today in talking about the game of blackjack, that most basic strategy players, most players at a casino really have not thought about. And, you know, what we want to take a look at, what's in front of us here is a deck of cards, all 52 cards turned up. So that we have the diamonds here, spades, hearts, and clubs. And the first question that you would ask someone at a blackjack table would be, how many cards do we need to be concerned with in the game of blackjack? How many cards do we need to be concerned with in the game of blackjack? Now, for most blackjack players, they're already confused, right? There'll be a little bit of a deer in the headlights. And the first we may hear that they'll say, well, it depends on how many decks. Okay, that's an incorrect answer. Next, they might say 52. Now that also is incorrect, because in the game of blackjack, suits don't matter. That also can be of a new concept to basic strategy players. So when we take a look here of a typical deck, really all of these suits don't matter in the game of blackjack. So how many cards do we need to be concerned with in blackjack? The answer of that is 13. 13 is a number to remember because it'll come up again later in the discussion. And the reason it's 13, and if you count one of these suits from ace to deuce or whatever, you're going to get 13 cards. Now, you may want to stop the video here, because if you have your cell phone for a calculator is fine if you're on a laptop, but you want to be able to have a calculator, maybe in a pen and paper, because we are going to do some multiplying, dividing, adding, and subtracting for you to understand the concepts that I'm putting forth here today in this video. And that is that we have a 1 in 13th chance of getting the card that you want. If you take 1 divided by 13, you come up with between 7 to 8% chance, 13 to 1. You know, 0.0769. So technically it could be 0.077 or any between 7 to 8%. And that's critical to understand, so that all of a sudden the typical blackjack player will probably be a little combative and not realizing that they only have to be concerned with 13 cards. And they'll start saying that, well, yeah, but there's how many decks and all of this other nonsense. Okay, so that as we can see now, we're only concerned with 13 cards. So if we take the 13 cards and we turn them over like this. Now, what are the odds and what is the chance of this card being an ace? The next card, this card right here, being an ace, right? 1 in 13. 7 to 8% chance that this card is an ace. Now, that's one deck of 13. So now let's take the spades, which suits don't matter. Let's take the next group of 13 cards. And what we'll do is we'll put these 13 cards on top of these other 13 cards. Now we have 26 cards. Now, what is the odds or the percentage chance that this next card is an ace? Still 1 in 13. Still 7 to 8%. Doesn't matter that we added another 13 cards on top of 13 cards, right? So now some of you are starting to think, because obviously, if we take the next 13 cards and we put those 13 on top of the next 13, now we have 39 cards. Now I see, you're going to understand my next question, right? What's the chance that this card is an ace? 13 to 1, 7 to 8%. Doesn't matter how many cards. So obviously now we're going to put the last 13 cards on the deck, and now it's the same answer. Now, if we take one deck and we take another deck and put it on top, what's the chance that that very first card is an ace, or any card? Could be an 8, could be a 7, whatever. Just pick one. 1 out of 13. It's 13 to 1 shot that this is an ace. 7 to 8%. I don't care if you put 2 decks on there, 3 decks, 4 decks, 8 decks. It doesn't matter. There's only 13 cards to be concerned about. Now, when we talk about blackjack, let's turn over again. Let's look at these 13 cards. And this makes it a little bit easier to understand. Because in the game of blackjack, if a dealer will tell you, or it's widely known, to make an assumption that the whole card is a 10. Now, whether or not you can actually see these cards, these are all diamonds, but suits don't matter. And it's from the 2 to the ace, 13 of them. Now, out of these 13 cards, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. How many are 10 valued cards? How many out of the 13 are 10 valued? 4. 4. That means that there's 9 cards that are non-10s. So if you take on your calculator and take 4 divided by 13, you come up with 30.7. If you want to say 30%, 31%, that's fine if you want to round up. So even though you're told in blackjack to assume their whole card, the dealer's whole card, is a 10, that's only going to happen 31% of the time, or 4 out of 13 times. Not so good, right? I mean, if an alien came down from Mars and saw this, he may ask the logical question that he would rather be right 69% of the time and assume that the whole card is not a 10. Because what type of strategy is it that when you're only going to be right 31% of the time? Now, we understand that there's more 10 value cards, 4, than any other value, but that's not the bigger picture point. The bigger picture point is that that whole card is only going to be a 10 31% of the time. Now, so the concept here about playing poker is that we want to be able to put the dealer on a hand. In poker, poker players put other players on certain hands all the time. The poker player cannot even see any of my 2 cards in Texas Hold'em. In blackjack, they can see one of the up cards for the dealer. Now, you mean to tell me that we can't put the dealer on a hand? Absolutely we can. Because the question that you should be asking is, well, Chad, if I'm not going to assume that the whole card is a 10, how can I assume anything else? And that is the key question, right? So, how this works is that in most casinos, there are 6 spots on the table. 6 players and the dealer. Now let's just use 13 cards as the example, because here where the 13 number comes up again, with 6 player spots on the table. Now let's do these 6 players, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the dealer. Now, so 12, 13. So we have one more card, okay? However, there's 13 cards that are up when you take a look at the table. And there's only 13 cards that we need to be concerned with. So obviously, your mind should be thinking now, well, wait a minute. Could you determine what this whole card is by looking at the cards right here, the 13? Obviously, right? you would just go and you would say, okay, ace, king, queen, jack, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. You don't see the 6. This card's a 6. You know this card's a 6. When we have automatic shufflers, they balance the deck anyway, right? It's only when you have manual shuffling that you get clumps of cards that make the deck completely out of balance. The mere act of automatic shuffling keeps the deck balanced. As a matter of fact, when cards start coming up, the adage to think of is that the deck always wants to be balanced. Balanced means, in card counting terms, coming back to 0. Because the more picture cards that you see, the more of a chance that you're going to not see a picture card coming out. See what I'm saying? So it always wants to be balanced. So that you have to take that sort of definition of gravity to your favor. Especially when you have the typical 15 or 16 that most players have, and that they get paralyzed. And they don't really logically go through a thought process like a poker player does in reviewing the hand to determine what they're going to do. They just sit there and they it's like flipping a coin. What should I do? Maybe you took a hit last time on 15 and 16 and you won. So you take a hit again. There's no logic to it. It's just whatever comes in your mind is your gut. What we're saying here is basic strategy. The name implies what it is. It's basic. Are there any other levels that you could do, that you can add on top of basic strategy to help you in those certain situations that you're in the 15 or 16 hand that can help you make better decisions, right? So let's say you're playing $20 a hand. Well, if I can help you make better decisions out of the hour, then instead of losing your $20 hand, you're actually going to win the hand. So it's a double whammy, so that you're not down 20, you're actually up 20, which is a $40 swing. So if you can make 3 decisions an hour because of your level of education is a little bit beyond basic, well now, it's 3 hands an hour, it's a $120 swing in an hour. You may only be sitting there with $200 or $300 in your bankroll. That's another subject to talk about. That with amateur gamblers, they only consider the strategy as being part of the game that they only need to know. But there's really 3 different parts. I mean, you've got your strategy, because in blackjack, you could hit every hand and lose every hand. So it is a little bit of a skill set in determining how well you can play. But in addition to your strategy, your money management strategy as to how you bet is very important, right? That's very important. And your bankroll. So those 3 things you really need to have a strategy with to give you a chance to win if you're going to play a game like blackjack. Now, the reason that I have these marbles is that let's assume there's 50 marbles each. The white ones are winners, the black ones are losers. Every game in a casino, while the rules of the game are different, the marketing of the games are different, really behind the scenes on how all of these games work is really a jar full of white marbles. Let's put the white marbles in here. White marbles and black marbles. So that let's assume, in the case of the discussion, that these white marbles, there's 50 of them. Okay? 50 white marbles and 50 black marbles. Now, every game is basically a game of a jar full of 100 marbles. Now, the 100 marbles, the way to look at this is, everyone knows or will admit that the casino has an advantage, right? How do they build the casinos? That's the typical answers you get. But we really don't understand how much of an advantage that they have. Well, depending on what game you're playing, will depend upon how many white marbles you have in your 100 jar and how many black marbles you have in the 100 jar. right? That's very key to understand. Now, when we take a game like, let's say, like slots, the skill of the player has nothing to do with the number of white and black marbles. It doesn't matter if I'm pulling the lever, or if my mother's pulling, or the lever, or your grandmother's pulling the lever. It's the same. That's why you hear the payout of 95%. That they pay you back, but they're taking 5%. So that in reality, their marbles in a slot machine are 48 white ones, 52 black ones. So now you're picking, but you can't look, right? You're just going to pick a marble. You're going to pull a lever. The difference is that those 4 extra black marbles, which are losers, the longer you play, those 4 extra ones are going to make you lose, right? Now that's not to say with 48 white marbles in the bowl that you can't get lucky some night and pull out a white one, a winner, and now you won again. You won again, right? Why do most people say quit while you're ahead? They have the right statement, but actually thinking it like this is a better answer. Quit while you're ahead because you don't have more than 50 white marbles in your jar of the game that you're playing. Now, there are some games of the casino floor, like Blackjack, and other games like craps, where it is the skill of the player can add the number of winning marbles to the jar. So, for instance, when you're playing Blackjack, technically if you keep hitting your hand till you bust, you would have 100 black marbles in your jar and no white ones. You lose every hand. So now as your education in Blackjack starts to rise, you get to put more white marbles in the jar. The card counters have to become so disciplined. Well, let me take a step back. The fascination with the Blackjack card is that my strategy that I'm talking about here, the foundation, yes, is a basic strategy. But the fascination with the card and the shortcut is very interesting. Because if I sit down on a blackjack table and I say I'm a beginning player and I don't really know what I'm doing, everybody talks about this, oh, you got to get this card. So I will be an actor, so to speak, and I'll say, oh my God, where do you get this card? And the player will say, oh, you're the casino, they sell it in the bookstore. I'm like, you're kidding me. This card, it must be hundreds of dollars. No, they tell you. No, it's $1. It's $1? I'm saying, wait a minute. They sell the card at the casino, and it's only $1? Surely they don't let you have the card at the table. Yes, they'll let you put it right in front of you. And the player keeps answering this question, and they never get the sort of the trap I'm putting them in, right? It's ridiculous. So that card, if you stick to that card strictly, what it does is it takes you from 0 white balls, if you keep hitting your hand and busting, to now it'll probably it'll put some 40-some white marbles in the jar, which is a big difference. So somebody that knows nothing about blackjack, they go from having 0 white marbles to having 40-some white marbles. Now, technically, it may be 45, 46, 48, whatever that is. Now, if you strictly don't adhere to it, you're going to have less. Maybe you have 39 white marbles. Okay? That's the basics of the game. But the game doesn't end there. And what I'm demonstrating for you today is that suits don't matter. There's only 13 cards to be concerned with. And can you put the dealer on a hand that's other than a 10 valued card? Because if you take a 10 valued card, you're only right 31% of the time. So I think that helps you understand why these casino games are so difficult, because the longer you play, because you have more black balls and white balls, you're going to lose. There's also an emotional aspect to playing these games, because not only are you winning, but it's creating good feelings. And everybody likes to feel good. And so when you win one day because you pick white balls out of the jar, not only is it nice to win, but it's nice, you want to get that feeling. Now you go back a week later, a month later, and you basically want to defy the odds again, right? And pick some white marbles out of the jar. Well, all of a sudden, those 4 extra black marbles, the 52 black ones, they start coming into play again. Now you lose. Now you're not, hey, I want that feeling again, that good feeling that I had a week ago. So that you think, if I keep playing, I'm going to get that back. But unfortunately, the seesaw of the number of marbles in the jar is tipped against you. Now, poker players, for instance, always talk about that poker is different than these games. And it is different. And let me explain why. Even though that we're still using money, and money is going to determine who wins, and we're splitting hairs if we're talking about it's gambling. See, gambling, technically, is reaching into a jar of black marbles larger than 50. See, the casino will never allow a game where the jar full of marbles will be 51 white ones, 55 white ones, 60 white marbles. That doesn't exist. Technically, at the highest level of blackjack, where you have to be super disciplined, where you have to have a money management strategy, where you have to have a bankroll, you have to memorize, you have to count. All of that work is to take the number of white balls from a basic strategy player of, let's say, 48, and all you're doing is making 48 white balls into 52 white balls, 53 winners, 54 white balls. And so now the longer you play, the longer you pick out of this jar, because there's more white marbles, you're going to win in the long run. That's the difference. But ultimately, the gambling of less than 50 white balls in your jar, that's gambling. When you go to a poker room, the number of white balls in the jar is determined by your skill level of playing poker. And it's determined by the players at the table. Let's assume there's 10 players at the poker table. Now, depending on your skill level, if you're there with 9 other professional players that play for a living, your jar of marbles, we can assume you have less than 50 white marbles in your jar. And if you would play poker with these professionals every time you go, it would be the same thing as why poker players don't play the house games on the floor, because they can never get over 50 white marbles. The only way that you would get over 50 winning marbles in your jar is that you would have to attain the skill level of at least or better than the 9 professionals at the table. You only have the number of white marbles in your jar that are greater than 50 when you're playing with other 9 players at the table that are your weekend players, your amateurs, they come in for the weekend, whatever it is, right? That's the difference. That's the difference between gambling at the casino versus playing poker. That the actual odds are in your favor, so that the longer you play, the more money you're going to make in the long run. Not just in your session for the day, but in playing poker, 1 day, 7 days a week, or whatever it is after a year. Now, for the poker players out there, in understanding pot odds, when they should bet into a pot, or when they should call an all-in bet, thinking about playing blackjack, why is it that the conventional wisdom that taking insurance is a bad bet? You see, blackjack dealers will tell beginning blackjack players to assume the whole card is a 10. However, when they have an ace up, they tell the player, all of a sudden, now, the beginning player may say, well, wait a minute, I want to take insurance. Now they're telling the player, insurance is a bad bet. Well, what does the fact of an ace being the up card have any influence on the bottom card? I thought you were supposed to think that the bottom card is a 10. You can't tell me to think the bottom card is a 10, and that's the correct strategy. At the same time, tell me that insurance is a bad bet. If insurance is a bad bet, then maybe it's a bad bet to think that the whole card is a 10. You can't have it both ways. I will answer to you, give you the actual answer as why insurance is a bad bet. The reason insurance is a bad bet is that if you take the chance of that hole card being a 10 is 4 out of 13, 31%. Take 4 divided by 13. If you look at it as pot odds, the problem is to put on insurance, you have to put up 50% of your bet when it only pays off 31% of the time. That's why insurance is a bad bet. If you could take insurance, and let's assume you had a $100 bet, and if they allowed you to bet what? How much would you bet that would be correct odds for taking insurance? If you had a $100 bet, how much? $31. Because 31% of the time, it is going to be a 10. That's why. That's why it's a bad bet. So that, now, how do you determine if you should take insurance? I'll explain that. Because there's only 13 cards to be concerned with, and because the chance of the whole card being a 10, if you deal out 6 spots, all right, let's deal out 6 spots. And here's a typical, let's do it this way. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, oh no, here's the 6 spots right here. Now, all you have to do is assume that the deck is balanced and that you count how many picture cards you see up. There should only be 4 picture cards up on the first deal round. So that 1, 2, 3. We only see 3 picture cards. So now there is, for the deck to be balanced, there is a high likelihood this is a 10. However, if you see more than 4 picture cards on the table, the chance of this being a 10 is slim. Isn't a 10. You see what I'm saying? So that, let's assume that you see a lot of, you don't see any picture cards on the table. Well, then it is worth paying 50% of your bet, because the odds are only 31% of the time this is a 10. But if you don't see any picture cards out on the table, actually that 31% goes up substantially. Maybe it's 35, who knows what the percent is, but it's getting closer to be the correct true odds of when you should make the bet. That's the similarity that there is in the thinking of poker compared to playing blackjack. Ironically, when you start thinking like that at the blackjack table, the overwhelming people at the table believe that you should only look at your card and the 2 dealers' cards. So when you're thinking, they think that you don't know what move to make based upon those 2 factors, when all you're doing is looking at the whole table. So let's assume that instead of having the cards at the players' spots, instead, let's assume that the cards were actually on the table like a poker table. Okay, so that now, let's assume there's like a flop. These are the cards, the 13 cards that are out face up. Now, if you're at third base on the table, you're also going to see other hit cards. So you're going to see more than 13 cards. But let's just take those 13 cards and put them in a line like a poker table. So here's your flop, your turn in the river. But in this case, we got a lot more cards to look at. Right? Got a lot more cards to look at. Now, when you play poker, you're looking at the flop and the turn in the river. As a matter of fact, if you see 2 aces on the board, you make the assumption that the poker player doesn't have an ace. Why is that? There's 2 more aces in the deck, but you know that the odds are that they don't have the ace. So it's the same thing here. So let's think of it this way. If the 13 cards, you're supposed to see one of each card. Let's assume that let's assume on the board that we've got 3 9s out there, right? 3 9s. Okay, so now we know. So first of all, we're going to put more 10s out on the board. Let's put more 10s to give the example. So now we've got how many 10s? Wait, let's see how many cards we've got, because we need to have 13 up cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 up cards we have. Now we know to assume this whole card's a 10, there needs to be 4 or less picture cards. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 picture cards. Now we make the assumption this isn't a 10. All right, now how many of each card should be showing? Well, there's only 13 cards to consider. If we have 13 cards up, when the deck is balanced because of the shuffler balances the deck, well, there should be 1 of each card. So that now we see how many 9s are there. Well, there's 3. So just like in poker that you assume that if there's 2 aces on the board that I don't have an ace, even though there's 2 in the deck, you can assume now that this card isn't a 9 because instead of there should be only 1 9, there's 3 9s right here. Even though there's more 9s in the deck, but in proportion and trying to be balanced, there's a better chance of a non-9 here than there is a 9. Now we know it's not a 10, it's not a 9. Do you see the deduction that you go through? Just like in poker, there's so many hands that the person could have based upon their, I understand it's a betting pattern, but you're deducting the hands that the person can have. That's all you're doing with the dealer. You're deducting the possible hands that the dealer can have. You can imagine the types of moves you would make with your hand if you determined that this wasn't a 10 and was another number. You know, you might double down on different things. You might split different ways. You might stay on certain hands. The bigger picture is, this is like a Wheel of Fortune puzzle. It tells a story as to what the next, not only what the dealer's card is, but what the next hit card is. It gives you an indication, just like this was a poker table and you were thinking, what is the odds of this next card, right? What possibly could that be? Just like in the Wheel of Fortune, if you know for sure that if another contestant asked if there was an S or a T, and there wasn't, you would look at those letters that have been called and that have been told are not in the puzzle. You would know that. You know 100% sure that if another contestant asks for an R or an S or a T, you know that that's not in the puzzle. Now, we don't know 100% sure that this whole card isn't a 10 and it isn't a 9, but percentage-wise, to come up with the plan as to what it is, we can rule out a 10 and a 9. This is what I'm trying to convey. This is how much more interesting the game of blackjack can be if you take the concepts of poker and apply it to blackjack. And then, yes, while the foundation is basic strategy, they call it basic for a reason. They don't call it advanced strategy. So that if we can put some decisions and understanding of the game layered on top of basic strategy, you're going to have a much more interesting game, a much more potential to be profitable, even if the decision-making becomes, you know, from losing a hand to winning a hand, even if it's a few hands per hour. Well, I think that's all for now. Let me know what other questions you have. These concepts do come from the book, Cutting Edge Blackjack. And I just wanted to convey some of this because it seemed, for some reason, when I talk about this, just by talking to poker players, for some reason, they can't make the transition. But hopefully today, I've helped you with some things in thinking about casino games in general, and more specifically, the difference between gambling and playing poker, and how to play blackjack a little differently than just the robotic aspect of the basic strategy card. That's it for now. This is Chad Aiken coming to you from the Aiken Research Group. Have a great day.